So in this module, we are going to talk about how to conduct usability testing. This is perhaps one of the core concepts of interaction design, because obviously once you have finished your prototype, you want to conduct a fully fledged study in order to understand whether the usability is actually to the point where you want it. Okay. And so let's look in details on what does it mean to conduct a usability study and what are the basic techniques. First of all, usability testing is one of the core techniques that we use in user-centric interaction design to evaluate basically a product. Okay, so it's not the same as doing a usability inspection methods. What we have seen for usability inspection methods are essentially cognitive walkthrough and heuristic evaluation. Okay, these two techniques are typically done by experts, members of your team, or people that are actually trained in interaction design. Okay. By contrast, when you do a usability testing, you tend to involve the end user of your product, because you really want to see whether people that don't know anything about the project, that are completely newbie to the story, they can still figure out what to do and how to use your product. Okay? So this is very, very important, and this is also one of the questions that you will find in the final exam. What is the difference between heuristic evaluation and usability study? So make sure you understand that what we are seeing here today is with end users. It's not with experts. Okay. Here at this stage, basically, we are not working with sketches anymore. We are not working with a concept anymore. We bring to the users pretty much an interactive design. Okay, so it has to be fleshed out to some extent. It has to be interactive. It has to respond to user interactions, because we want to leave them alone to use the product. We don't want to be there too much, telling them what to do and what to expect out of this study. Okay, so the basic idea is that we give our work to a user and we say, okay, imagine that you are alone and this is what you have in front of your eyes. So what do you think this is, and what would you do if I were not in the room with you? Okay, this is the main idea. So what are the typical things that a usability study involves? Well, we need to define some tasks. Okay, if it's an e-commerce website, we need to tell the user, okay, try to buy a couple of products using this site. If it's like a booking system, we can say, try to book like a new flight. So try to think about like the most relevant tasks that you expect your users to complete or to be in the need of completion when they actually use your product. Okay, and then think about the measures that you want your users basically to be the measures that actually you want to assess during the usability study to say whether your product actually makes the difference. And so typically in a usability study, we measure the time that it takes to complete the task. We measure the number of errors for each task. And by number of errors, we mean, for instance, if the users need to make 3 clicks in order to reach a page, and they do 4 because perhaps they go to a different page and then they reach the intended one, that is a mistake, right? It's not like the intended flow. Or for instance, if they need to go somewhere basically in order to type their email and they go to a different page, I mean, that can be also considered like an error. Okay. If they need to require like help and they go to a manual, they go to the help page, they try to seek additional forms of help, probably this can be seen as an indication that the design is not clear, and maybe we want to keep track of that, right? And also finally, we might want to also deliver some questionnaires at the end of our sessions so that we can measure, for instance, whether they are satisfied with the product, or if their cognitive load is above a certain threshold. And there are like standardized questionnaires to measure that that are typically used in usability studies. So which tasks should you use basically for your usability study? Well, that really depends on the main use cases that you have identified for your product. And so you should try basically to design basically a task that will force, in a sense, your test subjects to go through the use cases that you have identified. So let's imagine that you design this cheese grater, and obviously you're not going to say directly to the user, you need to take it with one hand, you take the piece of cheese with the other, and then you grate it. I mean, this is stupid, right? But you would say something like, imagine that you are cooking your pasta and you want to, make it more, give it like more flavor. And so, this is on the table. Let's see whether they are going to use the cheese grater in order to do what we expect them to do to make the pasta better, right? And then one of the questions that is very, very important, that it comes out a lot, and also the students asks a lot, is, okay, but how many people should I involve in my usability study? Well, this has been studied also experimentally, and this is like a very famous study that was conducted by Jakob Nielsen a couple of decades ago, actually. And it shows basically the number of detected usability problem, UP basically here, and here you have the number of subjects that are involved into the study. Okay, so as you can see, basically after 5 people, you are already at around 80% of all the issues that you can possibly catch in your prototype. And so typically we say, as a rule of thumb in the industry, is that 5 users plus minus 2, actually plus 2, not minus, but 5 users is the bare minimum number of subjects that you need to involve into your usability studies. Okay? How should you conduct a usability study? Well, first of all, obviously the target population for your product. This is pretty much the same as we have done in formative research, so it's not changing. You need to prepare a screener to recruit the participants. Same thing as we have already done for the formative research. You need to recruit the participants. Then you need to decide the tasks, as we have seen in the previous slides. You need to prepare the protocol that focuses on these tasks. Why do you need a protocol? Well, you will have a minimum amount of interaction with your test subjects, okay? You're going to discuss, for instance, what they typically do, if they're people that buy food online, or whatever it's needed for your project, and then you will, at some point, you will ask them to start tackling the tasks that you have for your experiment. And so the protocol will help basically the researchers go through the different parts that are necessary for a study, okay? Then you conduct the usability session. Typically there is 1 interviewer and 1 test subject, and typically these are between 45 minutes to 1.5 hours in the industry. Obviously, for the sake of the class, it might be shorter. Yes?
I'm sorry, but I don't like the idea that we should stop at 5 people, because even though we discover something like 80% of the problem of analysis, why we should stop? Because there is still 20 or more % that is not discovered yet. So
the reasons why you typically stop at 5 is because this is actually done in iterative cycles. So when you work in the industry, you don't do only 1 usability studies. you do multiple waves of usability studies. Okay, so you do one, you identify 80% of the issues, you give it to the designers and developers, they start changing stuff, and then you do another one. While they fix that stuff, you do already another wave of usability tests. So you do that continuously during the development cycle. So eventually, by the time you do the second wave, you will find another 80%, but many of the issues that you have found in the previous wave have been fixed already in the software.
So
and it's an issue. Sorry, it's an issue of time. Okay. So obviously, the more people you add, the more time it takes for you to complete the study, right? So you want to be very fast if you work agile in order to get to the next iteration.
But if you do a second wave, and without having fixed the first issue.
I know, of course, you need to fix something, otherwise it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, but you just told that for the second wave, you will discover some problems that had been already discovered. So what is the purpose of doing a second wave if you should first fix the stuff that was found out in the first one before coming to the second one?
Yeah, so maybe I didn't express myself clearly. So obviously, if you test exactly the same version, it doesn't make sense, right? But you know, you give the findings of the first study to the development team, so they start working on it. So maybe they change or they fix one or two. By the time they change something, you can already start organizing the second study, and then you give them back another list of fixes, right? And you go like that, right? But if nothing has changed, then there is no point in organizing the study. You see the point, right? Okay, so then once you have done with the protocol, you brief the team, you conduct the sessions, and then you debrief with the team. So what does it mean, debrief with the team? So typically, we try to involve not only the researcher that actually has done the sessions or the interview, but also the designers and the developers and the PM. They should all participate in the debriefing sessions. Okay, this is very, very important in a usability study because you know, sometimes the designers are very stubborn and they say, no, I think, you know, my design is perfect. But if you show them basically actual participants that fail to understand or they have a real issue interacting with the product, then they will be persuaded that maybe something needs to change in the design. And so it's very, very important to have like the whole team in the debriefing sessions. Then you obviously synthesize the study findings and then you iterate on the design of the product. This is the typical setup for usability studies. You have like typically 2 rooms. These are called like usability labs, and you find them in the industry. You find them at Google, Yahoo, you know, IBM, and typically this is like the setup of these rooms. You have like 1 desktop positions where you can test like web stuff. If you have like mobile interfaces, you typically do it in a round table like this. And then sometimes there are like interfaces for the TV, so you test it on a sofa, on something that resembles like a real living room, okay? And then, because obviously here you have like the participants and the researcher, you also have like a remote streaming location where the other team members actually can watch remotely the session in progress, okay?
Sorry.
Yes?
Can you go back to the previous? Yeah, on the observation room. So
yeah.
I guess that this virtual thing is a glass panel?
It's a screen.
It's a screen.
Yeah, it's either a screen or it can be a one-sided mirror. But one-sided mirror, I mean, have been proven to make people uncomfortable because you know that somebody is watching behind the one-sided mirror. So in the latest design of these rooms, basically this has been replaced by just a streaming TV set.
Okay, so it's a screen, but what does it show? So there are cameras?
Yeah, there are cameras basically. In this room, it's full of cameras.
Okay.
and typically the camera stream online, and then you can just watch it remotely.
Okay.
And you have like multiple viewpoints, and there is a remote control, and you can switch between one and the other. Sometimes there is also like an audio link between people here and the researchers, so that they can ask questions indirectly through the researcher. Yes?
And people don't feel uncomfortable with the camera?
So yes, at the very beginning, but after 2-3 minutes they forget about the cameras and they go on with the interview.
And fake mirror is worse.
Fake mirror actually gives you like an impression that there is always somebody in the back watching you, so it actually is much more imposing on the people than the cameras. Yeah, and also depending on the quality of the mirror, it's not fully it's half transparent. So if somebody actually moves very fast in the back, you can still figure out that there is somebody moving. So it gives you like that impression that you are in a cage. It's not very pleasant for the people. Okay, and then what are the key secrets? I mean, again, as for the qualitative research, I mean, you need to do, try to diversify your sample as much as you can, and have also a sample that is representative of your target population. Try to think about like the order in which you ask people to complete the tasks, because obviously they might, the ordering, the presentation of the different tasks might also bias the kind of responses that you get out of the interview. You need to conduct the interviews in a natural way without putting too much charisma into the presentation. So this is actually the contrary of doing a presentation at the end of this course, okay? The last day of the course you want to be charismatic because you want to win the points, okay? But in a usability study you don't want to be charismatic. The reasons being is that if you are charismatic, the more you actually put charisma into this, the more the participants of your study will try to please you as an experimenter, and they will tell you that they love your design and product, but actually that's not useful for a usability study. Okay. Also, give participants some time to talk, okay, and to think. Because sometimes I know, especially if you are not trained as an interviewer, silence is awkward, and we try to fill all the silence, we try to speak, and do stuff, but that doesn't help, okay? You want to also silence during these interviews because people might need to think. And usually good stuff comes when you leave like a little bit of silence in these interviews, okay? So if you wait, then they will tell you stuff that is very, very interesting and unexpected. Also, don't make like too much time passes between the end of the interview and the debriefing session. If you debrief like after 24 hours, you probably have forgotten like 60% of what has happened during the session. If you forget, if you debrief like 2 days after, probably you need to repeat the session because you forgot most of it, okay?
What kind of questions should we ask? Like, do you have some example?
Yeah, I have some examples later, but typically you need to ask very at least as possible during these sessions, because obviously you want your prototype to speak for you, right? So you might say, so at the very, very beginning you can have some ice-breaking questions, and then you might say, okay, so let's imagine that you want to buy a pair of shoes. Okay, imagine that this is like the site or the service that you are using. What would you do? And then you step back and you just watch, okay? And then you watch what they do. If they click on the wrong button, you sign like +1 for errors. Then you start your watches to record the time and so forth, right? And then if it gets stuck, then you need to chime in and say, okay, I'm sorry, this is just a prototype. It's my fault. It's not your fault. Let's move to a different task, or let me help you a little bit and see what happens. You see, these are the kind of stuff that you might want to say. And remember that the user is always right, even if it's not. And that's the truth. I mean, obviously, you know, some people in these interviews might act weirdly, and they might not understand how the system works, but it's not their fault. I mean, in the end, we are just testing the design, right? As I mentioned for the other interviews, you know, try to always act professionally in these situations. If you feel like the participants are aggressive, or you know, they might treat you not in a nice way, feel free to stop the interview and say thank you very much for your time, and then you move to a different participant. Okay? So, and that's also one of the reasons why it's best to do these things in couples or with a team. This is an example. We don't have time to watch the video here, but essentially what this video shows you is one of these usability sessions. So I encourage you guys to watch this at home. You will hear basically the researchers talking to the participants, so you will have like an impression of the kind of questions, how much details, how much you need to lead basically your participants, and also the kind of answers that you might expect. This is actually coming from a master thesis. One of the students of the previous years that did like a thesis with me, and so you can see, you know, typically how we record measurements during a usability study. You have here the different participants of the study. Obviously, we use pseudonyms because we don't want like their real names. And then we have like some of the measurements on task 3, task 2, and then you record the number of the duration of the task in seconds, and you can see, okay, you know, task 3, for instance, took considerably less time than task 2. Okay. Typically, we reward participants for their time. Here in Switzerland, the typical pay is 75 francs for an hour of usability study. This is what we give when we work in the industry. Obviously, here you will have to rely on your best smile basically to compensate your test participants. Don't give too much and don't give too little, because obviously you might bias also your results. And also, you know, depending on where you run the usability study, there might be other laws that apply. For instance, here in Switzerland, you cannot pay government employees for usability studies, okay? Because it would be like considered like a form of bribery, especially if these people might be working on pieces of legislation that might be conflictual to the kind of stuff that you are working on. There are also ethical considerations that go into the study, you know, same as we have seen for you know, formative research. Obviously, you need to ask participants to sign like an informed consent, and I showed you like examples and templates for this. You know, if you're working with minors, obviously they should be accompanied by their parents or their guardians. Don't do this only with the kids because you get in trouble. Don't record participants' PII, personal identifiable information. Typically in the videos we don't record the faces, for instance, of participants. And if they are, for instance, typing on a screen and then you are recording their password as they do that, I mean, obviously you need to delete this data from the recordings, okay? And all the records should be anonymized, and once you are done with the study, you should delete them because you are not allowed to keep them, okay? Oops, and these are like some templates. This is like an informed consent, again. And also this is like a protocol for a usability study. So you might want to use this in case you need to prepare the study. Okay, questions? Okay, let's see. Yes, I think we have a few minutes. So if you have like other team members that are still in the room, So you might want to discuss your testing strategies with your team. So you might want to spend a little bit of time thinking about which parts of the prototype should benefit the most from testing and why. These are actually, by the way, these questions will be really useful when you are going to work on your deliverable 3, because you need to motivate why you tested something. And so by answering these questions, you are already working on your 3rd deliverable. How you're going to test, what part of the flow you will focus on, what kind of details you need. I mean, this is also going to help you decide what levels to bring into the prototype that you're going to develop for these tests. Okay? So I give you 10 minutes. If you have questions, I mean, just feel free to ask. Okay?